Well, good morning everybody. Charlie Ives here from Regional Tourism Organisations. Pleasure to have so many people on board today to be part of this webinar around adventure safety, which is, as we know, is a very important topic within the tourism industry at the moment. I'm just going to make a very brief introduction of our presenters, and then I'm going to pass across to Helen, who is our facilitator from Magpie Media today to run through the technical sides in terms of how you ask questions and participate in the webinar. So we have three presenters for today. Firstly, we have Brian Smith, who is the Implementation Project Manager for WorkSafe New Zealand. Brian's been pretty intimately involved in how this new regime is going to be put in place, and I'm sure he'll be able to demystify the whole process for you. Deb Gray, who I'm sure many of you know, is the General Manager of Corporate Affairs for Tourism New Zealand, and Deb's going to talk about just how Tourism New Zealand is approaching the adventure safety regime and in terms of newzealand.com and IMP and Trade. And lastly, we'll have Steve Hanrahan, who's the Advocacy Manager for TIA, and Steve's going to talk about their processes that they're using in terms of their seminars they're running around the country and indeed their interactions with operators. So without further ado, I'll pass across to Helen to just talk about how you actually participate and how you ask questions. Helen, over to you.
Great, thanks Charlie. Morning everybody. So I'm going to show you how you can interact with our webinar this morning. So if you look towards the right of your screen now, you'll see that you have your very own webinar control panel. And during our webinar today, our audience microphones will all be muted, but you are welcome to ask our presenters questions, and you can do this by typing them into the questions box, which is located at the bottom of your control panel. For technology-related challenges or questions, just send me a message via that questions box and I'll do what I can to help you with those. If you have any issues with your internet connection and happen to drop off from our broadcast, or you find that you've exited by mistake, just use your original access link to join the webinar again. Our session is being recorded and will be made available to you to view later online. An access link for this will be available later this afternoon via the RTONZ Resource Centre in Dropbox. So to help smooth our webinar's delivery to your location, you should just close any programs that you have open on your computer now that might upload or download during the broadcast, and put a bit of a drain on your internet connection. And that's it from me now. Thank you, and I'll hand you back. Thanks, Charlie.
Thank you, Helen, and without further ado, I'll just pass across to Brian Smith, who's going to start the webinar.
Thanks, Charlie. Thanks, Helen, and good morning, everybody. Can I have the first slide, please, Helen? Okay, so this morning's session, we're just going to take you through the history of the adventure activity regulations and very briefly where it came from, a little bit of background on the safety profile of the sector, and then I guess one of the key questions for our regional tourism operators: what is an adventure activity and who does need to be covered by these regulations? A little bit about what we're planning at WorkSafe for compliance and enforcement, where we're up to in terms of numbers of operators and numbers of operators registered, and then just a quick map right at the end about locations of operators around the country. Next slide, please, Helen. Okay, so most of you are probably aware of this, but back in 2009 the government initiated a review of the safety regulations around adventure activity operators in response to a number of high-profile safety concerns. The review identified that the New Zealand regulatory system had a number of gaps in it. So there was civil aviation, there's maritime. New Zealand Department of Labour, as it was at the time, had regulations around certain activities like amusement devices and things like fairgrounds and that sort of thing. But the gap in the system was around adventure activities, which were identified as high-risk activities where there was no regulatory framework around them. As a result of that, the health and safety and employment adventure activities regulations were developed, and they were made, as regulations are, in October 2011. I won't use that name for them anymore, I'll just call them the regulations from now on. So what are the regulations set up and what do they require? Well, the scheme is based around a third-party audit. So an independent third-party auditor comes in to an adventure activity operator's workplace and audits whether or not that adventure activity operator has a safety management system that meets the standard that is set by the government. So that standard, we call it the SAS, the SAS, the Safety Audit Standard, and it is the standard that all adventure activity operators must meet, and their safety management systems have to be up to that standard. The auditors come in and after they've done an initial audit and they pass that operator, they then certify them as meeting that standard. And having certified them as meeting that standard, that operator can then be registered by WorkSafe New Zealand. The certificate can be anything between 1 and 3 years, and it's up to the auditor to decide how long it should be, depending on the risks that they find in that operation. If the auditor thinks it's a particularly high risk operation, they might certify for just 1 year and say, look, we need to come back and do another full audit in a year's time. But we expect mostly they'll be auditing for and certifying for 3 years and saying to the operators, look, we're going to certify you for 3 years, but in next year we'll come and have another look at your business, a sort of audit light, and then we might do that again the year after that. Once the person has been certified, that certification then comes to us, and the registrar then registers the person. Now, there are two different processes. Certification means the operator meets the standard, but the registrar has other things that they consider. For example, the registrar can consider whether the operator is a fit and proper person to be operating one of these businesses. And the registrar can also consider, for example, if the operator has not taken all practicable steps to protect somebody or to look after somebody's health and safety in the past. So there are two different processes, but by and large, when an operator is registered, is certified, they'll pretty much be registered straight away. The registrar can suspend or cancel somebody's registration. If, for example, somebody fails to live up to their safety management plan, they don't implement it properly, and they don't take all practicable steps to protect their clients, then the registrar may decide that they'll suspend or even cancel that operator's registration, in which case that operator will no longer be able to operate legally. Next slide, please, Helen. Okay, quick dash through the safety profile of the sector. Between 2004 and 2013, we've had 32 fatalities in this sector, 101 serious injuries, and as you're probably well aware, 2 of those have been very significant multiple fatality events. Thanks, Helen. We've also, just looking at the profile of those, outdoor education has been, there's been 10 fatalities in that area, that's in 2 events. Diving is quite a significant source of fatalities, mountaineering, heli skiing, quad bike, and glacier high wire bridge swing and riverboarding. Next slide, thanks Helen. This slide is particularly interesting, I think. This is the serious injuries that have occurred between 2004 and 2013, and you can see by far and away quad biking has resulted in the most number of serious injuries to participants, you know, far more than any other of the adventure activity operations. Thanks, Helen. Okay, don't worry too much about this slide because I'll try and make this a little easier to understand. But just taking you quickly through what is an adventure activity. Now, the regulations don't specify a whole list of activities and say, you know, bridge swinging is an adventure activity and horse trekking isn't. They actually specify the characteristics of an activity, and you use those characteristics to determine whether or not something is an adventure activity or not. I'll take you through the characteristics first, but in reality, when you look at activities, there are some activities that almost always will be adventure activities, and some activities that are pretty common that almost never will be adventure activities. And then there's some that are kind of grey in the middle where it's a bit difficult to know. And I'll show you a slide in just 1 second where we've broken those activities out like that to hopefully help you to determine what does need to be registered and what maybe doesn't, and where maybe you need to get some extra advice from us perhaps as to whether or not a particular operator should be registered or not. So just thinking through the, sorry, can you just go back one, Helen? Just the characteristics here, a couple of key points. The activity has to be in return for payment. It doesn't have to be profitable or commercial as such, but the person who's undertaking it does have to be paid for it. It has to be land-based or water-based. Things that take place in the air are covered by civil aviation, and they're not covered by these regulations. It has to be guided, taught, or assisted to participate. So if somebody is just hiring out hire gear, and then the person goes off on their own and undertakes an activity, that's not covered by the regulations. The regulations are really about where a participant has a guide or somebody helping them in pretty close proximity usually, and that person is pretty active in looking after the participant's health and safety. And so normal rental arrangements aren't covered by these things. The activities have to be for recreation or educational purposes. There are some sort of therapeutic things that are done that are not covered by these regulations. And then I think the next test is the really critical one, that they need to be designed to deliberately expose the participant to a risk of serious harm, and that harm must be managed by the provider. And if it isn't managed by the provider, then the participant is likely to result in a serious harm to the participant. So it's quite a high threshold, and there are a lot of activities that don't meet this threshold and some that obviously do. There are also some exemptions. Schools and private tertiary education facilities aren't covered by the regulations because they're covered by Aero standards, and activities that are already covered by Maritime New Zealand or civil aviation aren't covered by these regulations either. So let's have a look at the list of activities here, and hopefully that'll all become a little bit clearer for you all. So if we look at the activities on in the red zone, these are the ones where they almost certainly will be covered by the regulations. Abseiling or rappelling if done outdoors. If it's indoors, it's not covered by these regulations. There's a specific exemption. Bridge swinging, bungee jumping, although it gets a bit complicated here, most bungee jumping operations are actually covered by the amusement devices regulations, and they will need to have a certificate under those regulations. Canyon swinging, canyoning, glacier walking, riverboarding, rock climbing outdoors, scuba diving unless it's just in a swimming pool, and high ropes courses unless they're really close to the ground. All those types of activities you can almost be certain should be registered. I'll hop over to the green column now, and these are activities where you can be pretty much certain they're not covered by these regulations. Anything done in the air, covered by civil aviation. Jet boating, covered by Maritime New Zealand. Other boating type operations covered by Maritime if they're commercial. Whitewater rafting is covered by Maritime, it's commercial, where it's commercial. Cycling, just cycling on roads or cycleways or around vineyards, they're not covered by these regulations. Most fishing wouldn't be covered. Horse trekking isn't covered. Swimming with marine mammals, generally not covered. Hunting is generally not covered. And guided walking and tramping is generally not covered. Now I should just qualify that if somebody was doing something in a really extreme environment, for example you were hunting well above the snow line in avalanche country, that probably would be covered. But by and large you can pretty much assume that these activities are not. And then we've got the things in the middle, in what's in the grey area in this slide. And these are the bits where you probably want, there's a good chance they may be covered, but then they may not. And it depends exactly what the operator is offering and how risky the activity is and what kind of environment they're undertaking it in. So that's your canoeing and kayaking and caving, and you can read them there in front of you. Can I have the next slide, Helen? So here's a suggestion to you. If you're wondering, when an operator walks in the door and says, look, I'd like to participate in something with my local RTO, or I'd like to go on the iSite, or can you promote me, or can you put pamphlets in the store, or whatever it might be. This is some suggestions from us about how you might use that table that I just talked through. What we'd suggest is that if it's an activity that fits into that red column, you should always check if the operator is registered. If they're not registered, and there's a public notified register in an earlier slide with the email address, if they're not registered, we suggest that you would ask for a written opinion from WorkSafe New Zealand that that operator is not subject to the regulations. Now we've done about 150 such written opinions for operators in the last 3 or 4 weeks. So most people in that red column should have one of these already. If they don't have that sort of documentation, what we suggest is that you don't work with them or engage them or book them for clients or anything until you get some of that documentation. If there are activities in the green column, we suggest that it's reasonable that you assume that they don't need to be registered and that you don't need to see any written opinion from us. That's a pretty safe assumption in our view. You want to check probably though that if they are offering a really extreme form of the activity, whether or not they should be registered, and you might also want to check that if it's ballooning or a maritime-based activity, whether or not they have the necessary registration and documentation from those other regulatory regimes. Do they have an up-to-date maritime document, for example? Finally, for those activities in the grey area, in the kayaking and mountaineering and those sorts of things, we suggest there you check if the operator is registered. If they're not registered, you check if they've got a written opinion from us that they're not subject to the regulations. If neither of those things are available, then you can make up your own mind using the discussion that we've had here and other materials that are on our website, which I'll tell you about later. But if you're in any doubt, you could ask the operator to get an opinion from us as to whether or not they should be subject. And we suggest you do that before you undertake any engagement or activities with them. Thanks. Helen? Okay, last couple of slides now. So compliance and enforcement. We have been offering an enormous amount of support to venture activity operators to get them ready for this regime. We offered $1,000 to $1,500 direct financial support towards the cost of the audit, for example. We've had 6 free safety advisors who've been working one-on-one with operators to get their documentations and plans in place. We've put templates and guidelines up on our website and on the Supported Venture website, and we're supporting TIA through their workshops around the country. So in our view, there really is no excuse for an operator not to have got their safety management system in place and their audit done and completed by the 1st of November. Come the 1st of November, WorkSafe will be out in force to enforce these regulations. We've been telling operators that they can expect enforcement action on the 1st of November if they are not registered at that time. And we're really not accepting any excuses for not being registered. We've also been working with some of our key third-party partners. The Department of Conservation has said, if you're not registered on the 1st of November and you're an venture activity operator, you can't have a concession on Department of Conservation land. We'll be working with Tourism New Zealand, and Deborah will talk about that in just a minute, and other Crown purchasers like the Ministry of Education, Department of Corrections, people who buy these types of services, all in a similar vein. You have to be registered by 1 November or we're not working with you. Thanks. Okay, so a quick rundown on where we're at. 723 people have rung us up or emailed us and said we think we are subject to these regulations. Of those, about 360 aren't subject to them or have decided to change their business model or have decided to go out of business altogether. That leaves roughly 360 to be registered. Of those, 73 currently are, and there are still 289 to be registered. We've only got 10 weeks before the 1st of November, so that's a significant challenge, but there is plenty of capacity in the audit market to do that, provided these operators get their documentation in immediately and start the process as soon as possible. What we do know is about 90% of all those operators who are currently notified and need to be registered, about 90% of them have a contract in place with an audit provider. So that's really positive. That means that, you know, almost all the sector is engaged with this thing. The question is, have they made it enough of a priority to get their documentation in quickly enough? Thanks, Helen. And where are these operators? Well, this just gives you a heat map across New Zealand. As you can see, you know, the main centres still tend to be the base of these activities. Auckland is a pretty intense area. It's very difficult to read on the screen there, but it's about 70 operators based in Auckland. And then north of Taupo is you know, everything north of Taupo is pretty heavy. Nelson and Queenstown. So I don't think there's any great surprises about those locations. And the last slide, questions. and where you can go for more information. Thanks.
Thanks, Brian. So we do have some questions from the audience this morning. First one is from Gary. You spoke about the capacity to get the audits complete by the 1st of November, but he's asking, well, he's saying that operators maintain the audit process is seriously slowed and they don't have a hope of being accredited by November. So is this correct? And if yes, how are we to treat those operators?
Okay, thanks for that question. Look, our view is there is plenty of capacity still, and there is still time for operators to get they have to go through 2 stages. They have to go through a documentation audit, and then once their documentation is up to scratch, they have a field audit, and then once that's up to scratch and they fix any, what in auditor speak is called non-conformities. Once they fix any non-conformities, then they can be certified and registered. Now that whole process can take between 6 and 10 weeks. So there is still time to do that, but it will absolutely depend on operators making this a priority, and in particular, when the operators get their documentation in and their auditor has had a look at it, the time it takes for the operator to respond to the non-conformities and fix them up, that tends to be the critical length of time that delays the process. In our experience, it's not usually at the auditor level. It's usually at the operator level responding to these things. If an operator was completely on the ball, the whole thing can probably be done in 4 weeks. I don't think that's terribly realistic, and people will have non-conformities that they need to fix up. But it is doable in 6 to 10 weeks. There is time, but these operators absolutely must get their documentation in within the next few days, and then make this a key priority for them over the next couple of months. Thanks.
Thanks, Brian. A question from Sarah. Why are the likes of heli skiing and quad biking not in the red section when they've proven to be the activities that have a high level of incidence?
Yeah, thanks for that question. Quad biking, it depends on where it is and what sort of terrain it's on as to whether or not it meets that definition of deliberately designed to expose to serious risk of harm. Yes, there's been a lot of accidents, serious injuries in quad biking, and that's why obviously it is kind of in the picture. But where quad biking is taking place on pretty flat terrain and on slow vehicles, for example, that kind of operation probably doesn't meet the thresholds in law as to what is an adventure activity. Where somebody is taking tours on rough terrain with larger machines, that will almost always be covered. So that's why it's in the grey rather than in the red. Heli skiing, it depends on where they go and the level of avalanche risk. By and large, we would expect most heli skiing operators to be covered by these regulations. Thanks.
Thanks. Further question from Lynn. What's the cost of an audit?
It's a very good question. Somewhere between about $3,000 and $5,000 is typical for an initial audit, depending on where you are and how complex the operation is. When the auditors come along, they don't come along just as an auditor. They come along with technical experts who assess whether or not this operator is meeting, good practice for that particular type of activity. If the operator is, say, doing abseiling and kayaking, then they'll need 2 technical experts, or they may need 2 technical experts. That can push the prices up a bit. That's why there's quite a range. But somewhere in that $3,000 to $5,000 mark, and the government's made between $1,000 and $1,500 of support to help with the cost of that in this first year. Thanks.
Okay, and a question from David. He's saying Destination Wairarapa have been actively pushing this information to operators that they know about, and they've shared this list with WorkSafe. The question is, are WorkSafe able to share information on operators that they might not know about?
That's a very good question. Look, there are some privacy issues here where the operators' names are individual. It's a bit difficult. What we have done is in the past we've shared information with some of the head organisations, and and that's so that messaging can be targeted to make sure we get to as many operators as we possibly can. Look, I'll give that some more thought if that's all right, and maybe we can follow up on that in the next day or two.
Great, thanks. We've got a few more questions come through. One from Christy at Visit Ruapehu. She's asking, can we get some clarification around transport to high-risk activities? For example, we have transport operators transporting hikers to the Tongariro Alpine Crossing. Would they come under the grey zone?
That's another excellent question. No, they don't. If the operator is just the transport operator, then they're covered by the usual transport regulations. They'll need to hold the appropriate licenses and certificates of fitness for vehicles and those sorts of things. If the operator is doing transport and then they're doing some guiding and the guiding comes under the regulations, then we expect that the transport component of their operation will be part of their safety management plan, and the auditor will have a look at that and what we call ancillary service. So it just depends, but if all they're doing is transporting, no, they're not covered by these regulations.
Okay, question from Jo. She's saying that she was speaking with a dive shop in Auckland this morning who are waiting to hear from their auditor and have been for about a month now. They say that they've got all their paperwork in order, but she's wondering if it suggests that there may potentially be an issue with the capacity around audit providers.
Yeah, another sort of excellent comment really. We have heard a little bit of this from one or two operators who we're in pretty regular contact with as well. On the other hand, we've heard that there are audit providers with auditors, literally dozens of auditors who are doing virtually nothing because they don't have enough documentation coming in to operate. I can't comment on this particular case, but what I can say is every indication that we have had is that there are plenty of auditors available, and that there is capacity right now to do more documentation audit starts and then field audits than is currently coming through from operators. Now in this particular case, it's been a little bit more complex because of the ONZ situation, the RTONZ New Zealand situation, and some operators I suspect think that they are currently with an audit provider, and they may not have signed up all the paperwork necessarily, so the new audit provider hasn't got them in their books. So there are things like that can happen. What I suggest is that any operator who finds himself in that position, don't wait. It's the operator's responsibility to be registered by the 1st of November. If it were me and it was my business and I knew that from 1 November I couldn't operate unless I was registered, I wouldn't be waiting a month for my audit provider to get back to me. I'd be on the phone hounding them if need be, and if I wasn't satisfied, I'd look elsewhere potentially, but I'd be hounding them to get on with it, get the material back to me so I can get through this process. Thanks.
Great, thanks. A question from Reese. Can you clarify the liability to an eyesight of selling an operator that has had a certificate revoked?
There's two parts to that question. The first is what happens when a certificate is revoked. And actually, when a certificate is revoked, it's still up to the registrar to decide whether or not to deregister somebody. And the registrar must make that decision based on the substantive reasons why the certificate was revoked. So if it was revoked because somebody was unsafe, the registrar may suspend somebody or cancel somebody registration. And the registrar has to go through a little process before that happens. They need to give the person the chance to respond to the claims that have been made against them. So that's the first question, the first point. The first point is the registrar will deregister or suspend somebody, and that's their decision, his decision. The second part is what is the liability to the eyesights. You might want to get your own legal advice on this, but our view is that you don't have any legal responsibilities in terms of being held liable for putting somebody through this. The operators are responsible for determining whether or not they are covered. by the regulations, and the operators are responsible for being registered if they have to be. And I don't think that responsibility transfers onto, for example, an iSite. That said, I think there is huge reputational risk if that were to happen and then there was to be a major event. So, we're completely delighted at the response from the regional tourism organisations and iSites that they are participating in things like this webinar and taking this stuff seriously. Thanks.
Great. And a question from Anthony. He's asking about four-wheel drive tours. Are these adventure activities or covered by transport regulations?
They can be adventure activities. We do have some four-wheel drive tours that are covered by them, but it depends on the level of guidance and the sort of terrain that the people are going over. So if, for example, it's almost a club that gets together and somebody shows them a kind of a way, that may not be covered. But if the person who's showing them the way is actually actively helping people to navigate difficult terrain, dangerous terrain, that may well be covered. The short answer is, if in doubt, get the operator to give us a bell and we will work through with them the details of their specific operation and whether or not that meets the tests. Thanks.
Okay. A question from Chris, and he is asking, what would the enforcement approach be if an operator is partway through their audit at 1 November?
Our view is we will be taking enforcement action against everybody who is not registered as at 1 November. So if you're not registered, you can't be operating. It's a rapidly escalating enforcement regime. It'll start out with a written warning for most people. Unless we think there's something really seriously dangerous going on, then it could go straight to prosecution. But it'll start out with a written warning, then we move very rapidly to infringement fees. The maximum infringement fee is $3,000, and at a point we'll move over from infringement fees to prosecutions, and they are $250,000 maximum fine. There's also the possibility that the registrar will refuse to register somebody in future if they've been consistently operating outside the law. So the enforcement regime is it's pretty strong, and we'll be taking a strong stance to it. The short answer is this has to be a priority for operators. They need to respond quickly to what they get from their audit providers, and they need to make this an absolute priority. Thanks.
A couple of questions here, one from Sharon and one from Andrea along a similar line. So Andrea's asking, what is the best way of keeping up to date with organisations as they're registered? Do they keep regularly checking the WorkSafe New Zealand register? And Sharon is asking, how do we know if an operator has had their certificate revoked?
Okay, so in terms of should you check the register, yeah, I think that would be good practice is when you get a new client, or if you might want to regularly check whether or not the people that you're working with are registered. It's a public register. It's on the I think the website address is there. So it's a very short process to take a look. In terms of how will you know if they're revoked, if their certificate is revoked, you may not know that straight away. If their registration is revoked, they will come off the website. So that's the obvious way to know.
Great. And looks like a final question from David. He says, we have a property that has a high wire course. Just as I said that, another one came through. We have a property that has a high wire course but only use external operators to conduct the activity. Does the property need registration or just the external operator?
That is a very good and a very tricky question, but it's a very good question. How can I answer this in a way that it depends on who is legally providing the activity. If you are reliant on an external contractor to come in and undertake the activity, and you don't have a safety management system yourself, and you're saying to the contractor, you need to manage the safety of this thing, and you need to, and I'm relying on you to do that, then the contractor absolutely must be registered. They must have the safety management plan because they're principally undertaking the activity. You, as the provider of the course, may not need to be registered because you're not providing the activity per se, but you will still have obligations, normal obligations under the Health and Safety Act, so you must still take all practicable steps to protect the people who are coming onto your site, because you are, as the owner of that site, the controller of a workplace, and you have obligations under the Health and Safety Act. Now, I would suggest in your case that would mean that you would at least, one of the practicable steps was to make damn sure that everybody who comes in and takes courses is registered. So that would be an obvious thing to do. And then obviously any engineering requirements about, about the state of wires and maintenance and all those sorts of things, you would still have obligations to do all of that. Thanks.
Okay, further question come through from Joe. Could you please discuss with us the exclusion 3A regarding an activity for which a maritime document is required? We have a dive charter providing guiding, and our maritime advisor has told us that our new MOS system is auditing all of the activities we conduct on our boat, including diving.
Yeah, that's another really good question. The diving component, once you get off the boat, the diving component is an adventure activity, assuming it meets the other tests, it's being guided, etc. It's an adventure activity, and the diving activity must be registered with us. The taking people out and getting them safely on and off the boat, as well as, for example, maintaining any safety gear that you might have, that you might need in the event of emergency that's stored on the boat, all of that's covered by the maritime document. So unfortunately, or fortunately, as depending on how you look at it, an operator like that needs to have both their maritime, their MOS document, their maritime operating safety, I can't remember the last letter. They need to have that for the operation of the boat, and some elements that relate to the diving operation, but they also have to have be registered under this regulation.
Great. Okay. Rachel's asking, can you share with us the approach of, to seasonal operators who haven't had their Stage 2 audit and aren't registered by 1 November but want to remain active in the RTO space?
Okay, sure. The regulations, well, not the regulations, but the scheme allows for auditors to certify somebody, give them a conditional certification, which means we will register them even though they may not be operating at the time that they're certified. So the initial certification is done based on the documents that the auditor sees. The auditor will receive this operator's documentation. It'll say, this is how I'm going to do this is my safety operating procedures, this is my drug and alcohol policy, this is how I manage my equipment, and all that stuff that has to go into a safety management plan. The auditor will receive that, audit it, and if it's up to scratch, they can issue a conditional certification and we will register them. The audit provider will almost certainly put on a condition that, for example, I have to come and do a site visit on your operation within 2 months. Once they do the site visit, then they kind of remove that condition and the person carries on. So every seasonal operator should be registered before 1 November if they so desire. And they can do that. There will be some seasonal operators who just don't bother to register before then, and want to remain on the iSite. I guess that's a decision for each iSite to make as to whether or not they want to continue to work with those people. I don't personally see a big problem with it, so long as once they do start operating, you check that they are registered. Thanks.
Okay, and just a suggestion from Reese. He's suggesting that Qualmark attach the register to their new or ex-members' monthly notices to RTOs and iSites.
Qualmark, okay.
And just for those people that are asking about having access to this webinar after the broadcast this morning, it will be made available to you to view online, and you will be able to access a link to that recording via the Resource Centre for RTONZ. Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'll hand over to Deborah now, I think.
Thanks, Brian. Hi, everybody. Just a short few slides to talk through Tourism New Zealand's approach to this and the impact that the legislation is having on us, the thinking that we're doing, and where we're taking things. So, next slide, please. Thank you. So, of course, Tourism New Zealand is 100% committed to both the safety of the visitors who come to New Zealand to enjoy our product, and of course we're 100% committed to upholding relevant legislation. And I probably don't need to stress to you all that with the Minister of Tourism has a very high expectation around our behaviour as well in terms of safety of visitors and upholding the legislation. Of course, we're in a place which is probably quite similar to a lot of you, where we are already booking a lot of activity for post 1 November. So we are booking trade for meals to the country, media for meals to the country. We're also taking registration from operators who want to come offshore with us to trade events, KiwiLink, that sort of thing. And Tourism New Zealand absolutely cannot be working with an adventure activities operator that should be registered but is not registered come 1 November. And that's a very black and white decision. If someone should be registered and is not, come 1 November they will not be operating legally, and therefore Tourism New Zealand cannot be working with them. So right now what we're doing is talking with WorkSafe and working really closely with WorkSafe to sort of build our understanding about how we can share that information, how we can get that information about who it is that needs to be registered, who is registered and who is not registered. So we can look at what we're doing post-November and start making some informed decisions about the people that we can and should be working with. Next slide, please. Obviously, the impact for our business is really significant. We're working with potential adventure activities operators in all of our FMIL itineraries. We also could be promoting some of these people through our international media program. And of course all of the operators who list on newzealand.com, essentially Tourism New Zealand has a connection to that because we are promoting their businesses. Then you've got the potential for the activities that appear in our campaign work. And you've got the activities that might feature in our digital assets, so that's on our image library and on our broadcast media library. And of course there's the impact on Tourism New Zealand due to the association that we have through our subsidiaries of Qualmark and iSites. So for us it's a really big deal, which is why we're here today and why we're working alongside WorkSafe and RTONZ and TIA and everyone we can to help get the message out to operators and help operators to understand what it is that they need to do. So the next slide, please. And that's really just what's outlined on this slide, what it is that we are doing. We are working alongside all of those parties to try and get the information out there. The point to make, I guess, is Tourism New Zealand, of course, is not the enforcement agency. We're neither the regulator nor the enforcement agency. So we are really looking to WorkSafe for guidance around the sorts of actions that we should be taking, which is exactly the sort of thing that Brian took us through a little bit earlier. And we're working closely with all other agencies to really try and make sure that the information is out there and that people know where they can go for more information, where they can ask questions and how they can get what they need to be on the right side of the law come 1 November. So what that means is that you'll start to see a lot more communication out to industry from Tourism New Zealand itself. We're going to start putting a lot more of this information into our external communications, but we're also essentially upskilling our own staff, I guess, particularly in the trade and IMP teams, so that they can be having the conversations with operators if they need to as well. So that we have the information so that we can talk directly to operators and provide advice. But from our point of view, it is very much advice. It's driving them back to the WorkSafe information, the information that TIA has provided, because ultimately it is the operator's responsibility to step up and make sure that they are doing the right thing. One of the other actions that we're taking that I haven't put there on the slide, sorry, is we are going to be reviewing all of our legal terms and conditions, all of our legal documents that surround things like participation in our offshore trade events, being listed on newzealand.com and participating in FAMIL, to make sure that we cover off the fact that the responsibility is on the operator, to ensure that they are aware of where they sit within this regulatory regime, that they've taken all possible steps to ensure that they have the information they need to be on the right side of the law. So we will be putting those, all that legal jargon, I guess, into any of our terms and conditions documents that people sign, putting the responsibility back onto them. Ultimately for us though, we're very attuned to this. We will be looking for risk. We will be taking a risk-based approach, and if we don't feel that a particular operator, if we are approached by operators who say, no, we've checked it out, we're fine, we're not covered, and we don't feel that that is accurate, we will be taking steps, whether that's going back to the operator to talk in more detail, or whether it's even talking to WorkSafe to make sure that we're covering off our own risk. So that is pretty much it for me. And I know that we do also, I think, have Steve with a few things to say as well, but I'm more than happy to take any questions anyone may have specifically around Tourism New Zealand's approach.
Thanks, Deb. We don't have any questions at the moment, but certainly if you do have any, please feel free to send them through. Thanks.
Okay, well in that case I'll pass over to Steve at this point. Of course anyone is welcome to email questions through in future. We're very much here to answer questions, provide information and do what we can to help out, so do feel free to send anything through in future. But at this point I'll hand over to Steve. Thank you.
Deb?
Oh, no.
Just before you go, sorry, one just popped through. Question from Anthony: how is this information going to be fed to iSites who sell out of area activities?
So of course Tourism New Zealand has a very close working connection with the iSites, and information is already coming through, being fed through the iSites via our own channels. So of course we have Paul Yeo and Angela Stewart, who sit in the Wellington office alongside myself, who are already feeding information through to the iSites via their communication channels. So that's already happening.
Great, thanks for that.
Okay, passing over to Steve.
Good morning everyone. My name's Steve Hanrahan. I'm the Advocacy Manager for TIA, and I just wanted to tell you about the workshops that TIA are leading for the audits. We're referring to them as the Adventure Activity Workshops, and these workshops enable operators to support operators in their audit preparedness. The workshops themselves are led by a team of three, TIA team. There's Rachel Moore, and Paul Chaplow, and also Lady Christine is also assisting with the workshops. There's 15 workshops nationally, and they started last week. We've had an encouraging response to the workshops. There's been 112 operators enrolled to attend so far, so it's a useful start.
The workshops themselves have been promoted through different means, different communications. There's obviously the TIA's T-mail. WorkSafe have been active in promoting them, and we heard from Deborah, and Tourism New Zealand is also. The WorkSafe safety officers are also aware of them, and they deal directly with the operators in preparing them for their audit, so they know about them and recommending them. Yeah. The workshops themselves, I attended the first one which was earlier this week in Wellington. They're an excellent tool in supporting an operator to prepare for the audits. At that particular workshop, we had operators attend, and they were at a range of preparedness. There was one operator there who had his paperwork was pretty much all ready to go. He had a couple of questions just on the process of the audits, and he was ready to submit his documentation for the documentation audit part of the audit process. And at the other end of the spectrum, we had a operator there who was reasonably new into it and uncertain about a number of areas, and our people were able to sit down with the operator and talk through the detail of their particular program, their activity, ask them questions about so that the operator knew what they needed to have prepared for the audit. Our people doing the audits, Rachel and Paul, they have extensive auditing backgrounds and a great knowledge about audit processes, and so they're able to dig down in and provide really valuable information. So certainly encourage operators to encourage you to encourage operators to attend these workshops. The details and times of all the workshops are on the TIA website if you need them, under the events tab. We've had 2 this week. Next week we're running in Auckland, New Plymouth and Palmerston North, and as I say, there's 15 in total. The workshops are free to attend. Any operator can attend them. They don't have to be a TIA member to attend. They generally run for half a day, though the team are available at the end of it if they need to spend more time with a particular operator. I think that probably covers most of the points about the workshops. I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay. If anybody has any questions for Steve, please send them through. Just a couple of questions have come through from Rachel. Maybe if you're not the person to answer them, Steve, we can put the answers on to somebody else. Most important message for operators now is that they should send in their paperwork. There is a perception that they need to have it perfect before they send it to the auditor. In reality, this is a process, and the feedback from the auditor will help them to know which areas to develop further.
It's a very good point. An example of that, I had a Wellington operator just come into the office yesterday. He had all his paperwork there, but he had missed the Wellington workshop and he wanted to find out when they attend another one. And I encouraged him to talk to his WorkSafe officer, but to submit his paperwork. He was, if he was confident that he was nearly there with it, and to get the process underway, because when they submit their paperwork, they get the response from the auditor from that documentation audit. There's still support from the WorkSafe officers if there are gaps in that paperwork that they need to fill before the field visit occurs. So, yep, certainly do encourage the operators to get their paperwork in as soon as they can.
Great, thanks, Steve. No further questions at the moment. Thank you.
Thanks, Helen. Well, I think we've had a very productive 1 hour, and I think we're just about right on time. If there are any further questions, you now know that there is a team both within WorkSafe, Tourism New Zealand and indeed TIA that's here to help you, and of course at the RTONZ we're more than happy to assist where we possibly can. As Helen has mentioned, the webinar recording will go up onto our website probably this afternoon, but we're also making it available obviously to TIA, Tourism New Zealand and to WorkSafe, and I'm sure they'll make sure it's put into an appropriate place. If there are no further questions, I will wind it down now, and thank you very much for your participation, and indeed to our presenters, to Brian, Steve and Deb. Thanks for taking the time out, and we look forward to hoping that everything's demystified and your operators registering as soon as possible. So once again, thanks for being here.
Thanks, and I'll end the webinar for everybody now, and I'll count you out. 4, 3, 2, 1. Enjoy the rest of your sunny Friday.